Hello guys, welcome back to Not Just Mecha, it's Marco here, and today I paint my favorite villain ever. Thanks to my friends at Kimera Models, I had the chance to put my hands in advance on a new cool fantasy figure, and from the moment I saw the 3D rendering, I knew I would paint it as the best villain in the history of villains, Skeletor. The Masters of the Universe are one of the main pillars of my being a nerd, and I felt obliged to add this bit of pop culture into the model. I imagine the young Skeletor, still on the light side, but already a veteran fearsome warrior, exploring for the first time the corridors of Snake Mountain. He's contemplating the river of lava, while a fiery light glows on his equipment and heraldry, an omen of its future identity as Skeletor, Lord of Destruction.
Silence, you furry fool! I've had it with your whining and bumbling.
Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button to always know what happens on the channel. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community. I noticed from my students, my Patreon community, and the questions on the series dedicated to 75mm models that this format scares to death a ton of people. There's this common misconception that the large scale automatically means that you have to invest weeks or even months to paint a single model, suffering with every brushstroke. And I have to admit, I made my part consolidating this stereotype. I put the accent on competitions and that kind of super obsessive and extreme way to work on a figure that I personally love, but I understand that's not for everyone. Forgetting the most important thing, these models are pure fun. Plus, they are just large miniatures, and every wargame has heroes and monsters that are much larger. So, to tease your curiosity in the right way and to tempt you to try this format, I gave myself 3 days to complete the project, and I ended up using only 2.5, painting 90% with just a brush. Let's start saying that these models have usually just few parts, and they are very easy to build, even for a total beginner. When you buy this kind of figures, it's because you want to jump to painting as soon as possible, and they are made to give you this instant gratification. Another aspect that generates some confusion is the need of a plinth or a display base. Here I have a little scenic base, but often, especially with historical models, you buy just the figure on its legs. A nice plinth is able to complement the model exactly like a frame does for a painting, enhancing its general mood and often extending the storytelling outside the model itself. But to start, you don't need anything complicated. At the end, a plinth is just a block of wood, and any big hardware store usually offers for free this kind of simple cuts. I choose a dramatic angle as my main view, with the model looking outside the frame, and I temporarily fix it to the plinth with a single pin, a drop of super glue, and a bit of butyl. That's basically just powerful blue tack. As always, I start with a value sketch using white ink. I will not use a lot of transparency techniques here, just a bit on the cape. So in this case, its main use is to let me see better all the details, defining the main volumes and, more important, supporting the vibrant colors I plan to use next. I set a strong main light hitting the core of the model perpendicularly from the front, and its consequent light bouncing in the back. I want to paint using mostly the brush, but I have to save time where I can, so I use the airbrush to fix a base tone on the cape with violet ink. The transparency of the ink over the black and white sketch creates this basic modulation by itself. I use the airbrush for speed, but you can obtain the same using diluted paint or contrast paints. And to prove it, I use contrast Griff Charger Grey to prime the skin. I have the perfect tone to base the fur. But I realize that's too much purple in a single continuous block, so I go back to the cape, spraying a blue ink over everything to switch the whole palette to colder tones. The next large area is made by armor and metal. I use a light silver as base for the mix, adding black and turquoise to create a tone similar to Skeletor's skin. I use phthalo blue to balance the mix, pushing a bit more on its cold blue notes. With this color, I'm trying to bring the iconic Skeletor's palette with its classic positioning and proportions on a model with just a few millimeters of visible skin. You don't need a lot of metallic paints in your collection because you can easily create your own shades. Here I don't even use inks mixing the silver with the same purple I used for the fur. This way I'm sure that even with a different finish, the various purple notes will not clash together, because they are made with the same ingredients. I framed the skull mask painting the helmet with a very dark gunmetal, to translate the iconic darkness between the purple hood and the skull. And Molotov gold to the mask, that's quite non-metallic, almost a solid yellow with just a bit of shine. Before closing the preparatory stage and move to the fine work on the wet palette, I have a juicy trick for the base. I want him to stand on the fiery volcanic ground of Snake Mountain, and I use white oil paint to set a quick and easy, I would say almost automatic value sketch of the lava effect. I mix a thick wash using just few drops of white spirit and I paint over the entire base. I clean the excess with makeup sponges and Q-tips, paying attention to stay parallel to the base, to avoid taking away too much paint. I end up with a perfect base for a magma effect, with literally 5 minutes of work. Waiting for the thin layer of oil paint to dry, I give it half an hour. I prepare the main wet palette with a full Kimera set and few extra purple and violet hues from the Scale 75 line. I'm painting a lot of different tones of purple and their progressions, and I can really use extra intermediate colors to increase the variety. I want to finish the base immediately because it will be my secondary light source on the model, so I need to have it in place before starting highlighting the rest with the right tones influenced by the warm light. I simply add water to the cold yellow, making something like a navy glaze or a light wash. And I filter the whole base, moving the brush from the inside to the outside, where I want the maximum saturation, keeping the burning white in the center. And I do the same with orange and red. I add glaze medium to the palette for the next step, where I need a very transparent and stable glaze. I made a little time jump to show you what I'm doing, because in the first translucent applications it's impossible to understand what's happening. I use these large pools of extremely diluted paint to filter every part facing the ground, to create the sensation of a warm bouncing light from below. This light has a low intensity but a nice saturation of yellow and red tones, so a large filter and glazed edges create a natural effect over the real color of the various materials. I heat also the armor and other reflective materials that, even if farther away from the source, are able to catch its glow. Now that you know the general concept of the lights, you can understand my progression for the leather. I start from a neutral brownish grey, and I add warm tones and yellow for the parts facing the lava, and cold hues for the upper parts to create a strong contrast of temperatures. Similar process for my violet progression, but here I can't simply add yellow, because it reacts with the red and blue tones of the violet, creating a nasty brown green. So I jump to magenta and then I add yellow that will naturally drive it to the red and orange hues. I shade with these tones all the purple parts. The fur of the cowl is interesting because I can use every tone from deep violet to light blue, treating the mass of hair almost like a shiny metal surface, where I can use strong contrasts and powerful changes of tone, because of the reflections. I add to the palette inks and Scale 75 trash metal to paint the armor. The upper armor is less influenced by the yellow light from below, and more into the main light coming from the right side. To push the contrast and give more volume to the scales, I shade and kill the shine of the left half of every scale. And I add a transparent dark blue line on the left side of every edge. Then I add the highlights on the right side and a bright edge highlight to the middle line, and everything else facing right. With this kind of sharp geometric shapes, it's pretty easy to simulate the behavior of light. Same concept for the metallic violet and the gold parts. On the axe, I want a shiny blade coming out from something like a rough cast iron. And I feel the basic metallic shine glazing warm reflections from the ground, fading into the blue reflected from the cape. I layer the various levels of textures using silver with the color glazes to build better the sensation of the material. I just need to add more complexity to the fabric. The main objective is to differentiate more the bluish cape from the purple skirt. I cut a corner spraying with the airbrush golden high-flow fluorescent blue. This light sky blue in the upper folds will make the trick from the chromatic point of view. I add also a bit of orange to bridge better the blue into the yellow glow, that at the moment seems more weathering than light. But I want more contrast between the two materials, not only between the colors. So I highlight the violet with thick paint and strong brushstrokes to simulate the threads and the large rough structure of the fabric. Plus, Kimera Kolors dry matte, so the whole skirt will be very matte, and with a strong texture. This is one of those little things that make a huge difference when you see the model in person. For the cape, I dilute more the colors, adding also a good quantity of Kimera satin varnish to keep the general silky sensation. And to push even more, I glaze my transparent highlights using a fine dotting to create a different and delicate texture. The glaze dilution and consistency can be used in a lot of different ways, not only with long fluid brushstrokes. Dotting is an easy way to apply very controlled glazes that, depending on the dilution, can leave more or less textures. It's a great technique to paint a realistic human skin in large scale, for example. I do the same for the three main colors of the cape: blue, orange and yellow, merging the different highlights into the base and into each other. And I use the same pools to paint cuts and imperfections of the fabric, catching the various lights with different angles and colors. And here is the final result. About 18 hours of work and a ton of fun. It can seem a lot for a wargamer, but if you are painting for the joy of painting, this is not so different from the time you invest on an hero or a display miniature. So the scale will not really unbalance your hobby time, but you get to play with larger, interesting areas where you can push the limits of what you can do with light, materials, textures and volumes to a completely new level. It's a bit hard to condensate these hours of work into a YouTube video, but this is the full explanation of what I've done. All the rest is just the time to put the steps into practice and millions of brushstrokes. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, and you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials. And if you want to support the channel and my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!